Okay, both ends are stood up. Both gable ends are stood up. They're both notched, ready for the for the LVL beam. The beam is 40 feet long. The distance is exactly 40 feet from end to end. This is my 40-foot long, 14-inch LVL. I hauled this up here with my truck and trailer because the supply house could not get their trailer up here, number one. And number two, the soonest that I could get it up here, that they could get it up here, would have been tomorrow afternoon. So I used the backhoe again for the 56th time to get it up here. I got it sitting here. Now this is my contraption to get it in place. I would guess this LVL weighs around, I don't know, 350, 400 pounds maybe. This is going to be the part that's going to be a pain. I built a little scaffolding just to kind of keep me off the stairs if something did happen, but I took these 2x12 by 12 footers and I nailed them. They're nailed in every which way I could nail them, and I put some treads there just to give me something to bite on. And I am going to try and get this thing up in place. I may have to use Terrell and Cole for some help, but I got to get this thing up and in place so I can get the rafters going. I got the 40-foot LVL beam in place, not without struggle. The beam weighs about probably 350 pounds, in that range, I would guess. The beam itself is a 14-inch LVL. I had to drive 30 miles away to get it. Part of my problem was the only trailer that the company had to get it here would not come up the road. And so I managed to use my little 14-foot trailer in my truck, and it hung about 8 foot over my cab and about 8 foot off the back, but I managed to get it up here without any issues. I used a couple water barrels to let it slide on as I turned. Got it up here without any issues. When I was setting the beam yesterday, I tried to do as much as I could myself as usual, and the beam shifted and pinned against my legs for a good 30 seconds, and it did not feel good, and so I stopped and I ran and got Terrell and his son Cole. What I did over the stairs there is I built a scaffolding to make sure that it was safe over the stairs. I just framed up a scaffolding, and then we got that in place last night, and then today I was able to actually by myself kind of do the same thing, where I built another scaffolding on this end and I progressively kind of shimmied it up and then dropped it in. So everything went well. Over the last couple of months, I've had a thought that I needed to get out in front of, and I just haven't done it. And the thought goes back to the inspections and the type of permit that I have on this property, on this particular building. On the main house that you can see out the window there, the foundation, I pulled a traditional permit because I was required to pull a permit, as that's what the city required, the county required. On the shop here, I was only required to have what's called an ag permit. And the ag permit is typically designed for, just like it sounds, for agricultural use. If I wanted a shop and nothing else, I didn't need any more than that ag permit. But over the last couple months, I just kept thinking, this really isn't the right permit for this building. I probably should get out in front of this and make sure that that I don't run into problems down the road. And I don't know what legally could happen if I build a structure in this county without the proper permitting, but I don't want to find out. I don't want to move my family up here and find out that you know, I got legal issues now because I didn't pull the permit. The good news is, so I called the inspector, who's a friend of mine, and I called him up and asked him to come up this morning, and he looked the place over, had a couple minor changes, a couple of suggestions. Thank goodness I had him come up here before I started on the rafters, because he explained to me what I needed to do to make sure it met code. But everything's fine. Everything's good. And so we transitioned the permit from what's called an ag permit to just a traditional building permit for a home. Now, I pulled a permit on my septic system. There's no issues there. But now I'm going to have to jump through a couple of minor hoops to make sure everything else is inspected. But the good news is, from that point on, there's no issues as far as this being even a permanent living facility. So I'm super glad that I called him. This is the downside, I guess, to living in a county that requires inspections. You know, in this little niche, off-grid living, homesteading, things like that, people regularly try to find counties that do not require building permits. In my opinion, there's a downside to some of those counties. So because of where we're at, I'm going to have to spend a little bit of money on some other permits, but that's okay. I don't have any issues with it. And thank goodness, so far, everything that we've done, I just had, in my mind, I had a feeling I need to build this to code. Don't build a pole barn. Frame it up properly, build it, you know, like a normal home would be built, and everything's good. The next step is I've got to get all of the rafters up here in place. The weather changes at about 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm afraid I'm going to come up here tomorrow morning and it's going to be wet and rainy, but I'm going to keep working. I want to get all the rafters up here and in place so I can work tomorrow, even if it is raining. It's supposed to rain most of the day. The next step is to get the rafters trimmed. I may get up on top of that beam and pull a string line just to make sure that thing is straight and true as I set rafters. But I'm going to try desperately to get all the rafters set and in place so I can get the shear on the roof and not have any issues with that. When I showed the inspector the floor joists, he thought it was overkill. He said it was a little bit overkill, but he walked around up here on the second story and he was completely happy with the way it felt. So this is the downside, if it is a downside. I don't have a problem with that. I'm a licensed contractor. I don't have a problem with doing things by code, even though it can be a little bit of a pain sometimes. But the problem with putting your life on the internet for the world to see is sometimes people stick their nose in business that isn't theirs. And in my opinion, it's better just to get out in front of this stuff. And I don't ever want to do anything up here that would cause people to think that I didn't follow the proper codes, and that we're living in some sort of a shelter or a home that wasn't built to code. So I'm going to get all the rafters up here and get that in place, and hopefully by Saturday I'll have them all done. The rafters, I'm going to do what's called an exposed rafter tail. The exposed rafter tail is going to take more time because there's some detail that my wife liked with those 2x12s, leaving the 2x12s hanging down that far. I thought rather than leaving the 2x12s just hanging out there, that I would do some sort of a little bit of a decorative detail on the rafters, and so each one of those I'm going to have to cut with the jigsaw, but it should look really cool when it's done. So here's a little taste of what's to come. I took a piece of scrap 2x12 and I found the angle, and then I figured out the distance that we wanted for the rafter tails, and I made that little piece first. Then I next transferred that to a 2x12 and traced it on there, and then figured it out to where it was sitting perfectly. Had to play with that notch there a little bit. This is the detail that my wife wanted on the rafter tails, and so The idea is that once it's up there hanging off, it'll have about a 16-inch overhang with that detail on it.